Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now today we're looking at the Core i9-9900K, the CPU that brought the i9 name and higher core count to the mainstream. This has always been one of those chips that never quite made sense to me. It cost $500 or £600 back in 2018, and you could get very similar performance out of the cheaper i7-8700K. To be honest though, I probably wasn't the target audience. This thing cost more than my entire PC at the time. Fast forward 7 years and it's still quite difficult to justify. I paid £160 for this one, and in the States I've seen them on eBay for between $150 and $200. That's modern platform Ryzen or i5 money. The 9900K was an enthusiast's chip then, and it still is today, albeit for slightly different reasons. Would I recommend buying into the 1151 platform in 2025? Probably not, but if you have an 1151 PC that you're looking to max out without replacing your board and RAM, well, you might just be eyeing up this aging i9. Personally, I've wanted one of these for ages, and I'm curious to see how it's holding up. My first attempt at gaming on this thing was a bit of a fail. See, I've had this Gigabyte Z370M board for a while. It can handle basically every other 1151 CPU just fine, so I thought I'd slap the i9 in here. Big mistake, buddy. This chip wouldn't even budge past 4.2 GHz on all cores. Now it's supposed to hit 4.7 when all 8 cores are utilised, but this board wasn't having any of it. I tried removing the 95 watt power limit in the BIOS, but maybe it's just enforced at all times to stop the VRMs popping. They aren't great here. Wishful thinking on my part perhaps, sticking a once £600 chip in the cheapest board I could find. Another £80 later, and I ended up with this, a Z390 Gaming X. Nearly £250 in total later, and we were ready to try again. Luckily, I already own the 3200MHz DDR4, or I might have had to remortgage my house. At least we don't need DDR5. I'd need a loan from the Amazon man himself to buy some of that right now. For some reason, my new motherboard defaulted to Chinese, I think. Not sure why, but we'll move past it. After getting Google Translate on the job, I headed to the Gigabyte site to download the latest BIOS, just to be sure that we had all the latest features. This board handles the i9 perfectly. The stock all-core speed of 4.7 GHz was easily doable, and I could even keep it cool with this, my cheap Thermalright AK120 SE. This video is not sponsored by Thermalright, but the next one could be, nudge nudge. I then cranked the clock frequency up to 5 GHz without any stability or heat issues. The i9 was running warmer, but nothing concerning. For my gaming tests, I paired this CPU with 32 gigs of 3200MHz DDR4 and a Radeon RX 9060 XT 16GB and tested at 1080p to start. The processor limits our graphics card to PCIe Gen 3, so performance might be affected by like a couple of % at most. Where you'd see a real issue is if you paired it with a 4-lane PCIe GPU, like the 6500 XT, but that is just a cursed combo and I do not recommend it. In fact, I forbid it. Don't do it. I'm pleased to report that performance was pretty solid, though there were some noticeable bottlenecks. I'd say the 9060 XT 16GB or equivalent, so maybe a 5060 Ti, is as high as you'd probably want to go, at least if you want to play games at 1080p. Anything weaker, say something entry level or budget, and you'll be fine nearly all of the time. The i9-9900K still holds its own pretty well. This 5 GHz overclock doesn't make a massive difference from what I found, but it did seem to bring some of the percentile lows up a little bit, so games ran a bit more consistently, which is always a bonus. We'll start with Counter-Strike 2 here then, which is a bit of a mess in terms of CPU and GPU utilisation, but as you can see we have the CPU core clock of 5 GHz here. With the Thermalright Assassin King 120 SE cooler, we're seeing less than 70 degrees, consuming less than 100 watts of power here. Oh, I spoke too soon, it just peaked at over 100. Yeah, you're going to see that with the i9, a constant or a very regular reading of over 100 watts, to be honest. And that, of course, is another downfall of this chip in 2025, where we see a lot more efficiency from CPUs these days. This thing sort of just brute forces performance by throwing power at the situation as well. But it isn't too bad. It's not like ridiculous. In Cyberpunk 2077, we ran things at high. Again, 5 GHz was easily achievable by the i9. This time we're seeing a much warmer temperature from the CPU itself, and of course the power consumption has increased yet again. This is a far more CPU intensive game, and we can see that by the fact that the 9060 XT is really dropping in terms of utilization. It's not really sitting near 100% utilization consistently, and it would be if the GPU was the limiting factor. That's what you're going to want really from any gaming situation. You want the GPU to be maxing out so that you're getting the best performance from it. If your CPU isn't strong enough or there's a bottleneck, then it's going to prevent the card from working at its best, and therefore it's going to mean that your games aren't running as well as they could be. So we're still getting pretty decent performance here, a few dips and drops below 60 FPS every so often, but bear in mind that we are still running at 1080p, so that is expected in some situations. I was really happy with the Battlefield 6 performance. In this case, we did see the GPU basically hitting 99-100% utilization more often than not. There were cases though where the CPU was obviously the limitation, creeping up towards and occasionally exceeding 90% usage, again while consuming near 150 watts of power. I didn't actually touch anything in the BIOS for the thermal settings or the power settings. I literally just overclocked it to 5 GHz and then just jumped into a few games. So perhaps there are a few more tweaks we could do, but it's an old power hungry chip, so don't expect too much in terms of power savings from it. The performance in Battlefield 6, however, was pretty consistent, pretty decent a lot of the time, and you're going to have a great experience with this older CPU anyway. GTA 5 Enhanced ran really well. I'm using the maximum RT preset here, so the game's looking really good, well over 60 frames per second at 1080p resolution, no complaints here. The CPU's running at about 70 degrees, and this makes for a pretty nice pairing in this gaming situation. Interestingly, Fortnite is one of the games that I wasn't really expecting to push the CPU too hard, but there were instances whereby we hit like 100% usage, and this lasted for a few moments. Now, I thought this was just because I had jumped into the game and hadn't given it enough time like for assets to pop in, so it was sort of increasing the CPU load, but it dropped to like 60-70%, and then every so often it would jump back up again to over 90. Not that our GPU was struggling. I mean, this was pretty much pegged at 99% most of the time anyway, and that just means that in situations like this, it actually makes for a pretty good configuration. The 9900K and 9060 XT are working quite well together, and it's not just here either. Battlefield 6 was another good example, I think. In Red Dead Redemption 2, one of the main areas where I noticed some issues in terms of bottlenecking was in and around Valentine, and the same thing is going to happen in Saint Denis. I ran through the sort of central part of town on the back of the horse here. We saw the GPU usage drop to the high 60s, and this does indicate quite a big CPU bottleneck, so where you're seeing lots of NPCs or action on screen, you might see the i9 dip a bit in terms of performance, but again, for the most part, it's holding up really nicely. I then swapped the 9060 XT 16GB out for a more powerful RX 9070 to see how things ran at 1440p. It's a similar story here as it was with the 1080p results. Sometimes the CPU will run out of steam, leaving a bit of performance on the table, and other times it will do just fine. Sometimes it will be a mix of both in one game, depending on what's going on screen. We'll run through the gaming tests yet again. Counter-Strike 2 here running really nicely. The GPU is actually doing a bit more here, being utilised a bit more. The high resolution certainly helps here. The CPU sort of sitting back, relaxing, 30 to 50% utilisation, still hitting that 5 GHz all-core clock speed thanks to our slight overclock. I thought a more powerful GPU and a high resolution may help alleviate some of the strain on the CPU here, but the 9070 is still held back just like the 9060 XT was, especially when we get into those busier areas of Night City. It's clear that we are being limited by the i9, but it's still a pretty decent effort. There will be drops below 60 FPS even at 1440p with these visual settings, but a lot of the time you're going to see plus 60 FPS. If you're exploring outside of the city, then the frame rate's going to be even better. But even in Night City, running around causing chaos, it's not too bad at all. In Battlefield 6 at 1440p with the 9070, I did notice a few more instances whereby the CPU was a bottleneck. I think it's just because we've gone for the higher end card now, the more capable card, and the i9 is struggling a bit more to keep up even at this higher resolution of 2560 by 1440. While the high res will put more strain on the GPU, it's not just going to magically make any CPU limitations disappear, so that's worth bearing in mind. But this is a more capable pairing than I did initially anticipate, so I'll say that much. GTA 5 Enhanced also ran really well, like it did before, to be honest. With the maximum RT preset, we have FSR 4 enabled here as well, set to native, so the game's looking pretty decent, running really nicely, and I've had a great time with the i9 so far today. Just like before, with Fortnite, there will be moments whereby we're getting like 90-100% utilisation, even after playing for half an hour or so, so I think that's just something we're going to see with this CPU, and with all the fancy lighting effects on, it looks great and runs well, more importantly, on this configuration. Of course, Red Dead Redemption 2 running just as well as it was before, exploring Valentine once again, and there's going to be the same dip and drop that we experienced through the centre of town, but nothing significant, and honestly can't complain that much considering we're using a CPU of this age. But it was high end, the best you could get in fact at the time, so it's no surprise it's holding up as well as it is. So overall, the i9 9900K is still pretty decent, and I should hope so for an 8-core 16-thread CPU that cost me more than my first car. I mentioned at the start that I probably wouldn't build a PC with one from scratch, and this is because there are better options out there, less power-hungry options that will run cooler, perform better, and have upgrade paths to even faster processors. To demonstrate what I mean, I compared a few of the more CPU-intensive games running on the overclocked i9 to my i5 12400F, all reliable. The i5 is sitting on a basic H6 10M motherboard with the same RAM. I tested at 1080p with the 9070 to better highlight the differences between the CPUs. The i5 will offer higher frame rates and smoother performance, and we don't need a fancier motherboard in order to achieve this performance either, nor do we need to overclock, which I don't think we can anyway on this thing. The i9 has had a good run though, and it's still running. 7 years later, and less than a third of its original price, it certainly sounds like a more tempting proposition these days. I'm glad I finally got to experience one. It's made me very happy. Maybe we'll do a full build soon. I want to put something together that features like 2 Titans or something like that. So I might pair those with the i9 because that would be pretty interesting. But thanks as always for watching. Let me know your thoughts down below, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.